coordinator. I'm a data scientist.
I'm Ken Dahlmeyer. I'm a transportation planner from around the region.
Hi, I'm Linda, and I like art and package.
I'm Walter. I'm trying to build my first HH. Oh Lord.
So like a jargon question come up. But anyway, I've been doing, I'm a Java architect at the SBA group.
Geographic software developer, cars.com.
Senior Advanced Transportation Reporter for Street Flagship Product.
Jim McGowan, disaster operations with Red Cross. Called Global Partner of Tech Strategies.
I'm Laurel Wamsley. I work in marketing and signal, and I also do writing and radio about cities.
I'm Evan Beckner. I'm a civic technologist with Microsoft.
Hi.
My name is Zach. I'm soon to follow in.
My name is Jay, same as the other two.
Hi, my name is Sonny Gulak, and I am from Ball as well.
Hi, I'm going to be away. Surprise, I'm from Paul too.
I'm Linda with owner of
I'm Steve, I'm a content guy.
I'm Mike Kirknett, one of the publishers in New City.
I'm Lucky Camargo, and I work for Charter School. I'm a student of Chicago County. I'm Amanda,
I'm Steven, I'm Ilya.
I'm David. I direct the Court Involved Youth Project and Health and Medicine Policy Research Group.
Ryan. I'm Trevor. I'm Andy. I'm from the CPS Central Office. My page software engineer for Phenomenal Budget Analyst. Brian Burrow, software developer.
Joe Jasinski, software Visual Python software developer at Metro Landscape.
My name is Eric Crazy, JS.
My name is Paul Bias, I'm a reporter with DNA.
I'm Jim Secret, first time here. I'm from Illinois.
I'm Pete, I'm a developer.
Shannon, data scientist. Alex, also first timer, student at Northwestern.
And software developer at Numbers.
Lorenzo, student at Paul. There's natural physics. Who's Mark? I'm a product manager.
My name is Derek. Already at the
Shout. Mr. Paul Stanley. My name is Paul. I'm a chief technical lead in the Java software development.
My name is Steve Grace. I'm working on a couple of projects, but if anybody has requested bulk electronic data from the county, I would like to talk to you before.
I'm Dennis. I'm with Dennis.
My name is Andrew. I'm also a recent graduate.
My name is Emily, and I'm a former attorney musician, and I'm Meg, I'm a data analyst with Paul Marketing. My name is Denise. I'm in Logan Square since all the end this week.
I'm Joel Inwood. I'm a public information officer for Cook County.
My name is David, I'm a healthcare data analyst.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Scott, I do email and search engine marketing.
I'm Carlene, I'm a technical writer and editor. Hi, I'm Pam, this is my first time here.
Brent Faulkner, Deputy Graduate. Todd Koenig, I'm in logistics and distribution, and Moonlight as an artist.
My name is Matthew, and I'm a student at Paul.
My name is Micah, I work in NASCAR.
I'm Troy. I'm a data engineering scientist at Sparks.
I'm George, I'm a grad student at Paul.
Martin, I'm a transportation planner.
Steve, and I like maps and communities.
I'm John Krause, I'm an architect. I started Chicago Streetcar Renaissance.
I'm Nate. I do freelance community engagement.
I'm not here, with a not-for-profit, community organization, doing data analysis.
I'm also a student. Maliki, software developer.
I'm Cycle, software developer.
I'm Jordan, I work in the analytics team here at Princeton.
I'm David Crespo. I also work
And
Everywhere.
we missing anybody?
Forest Road.
I'm Josh Galos, I'm an open data consultant. I work with Cook County government on open data and forestry here.
My name is Tom Shank. I'm the Chief Data Officer from the City of Chicago.
I'm Rachel, I'm from the Conservation and Traditional Trust.
Hi, I'm Barry, I'm a partner at Geographic.
My name is Renee Cox, I'm a topic facilitator.
Miss anybody else? Nope. So how many of you are new here? That is so awesome. All right. So just as a warning, we are now live streaming this once again. Most of the time it'll just be whatever's on the screen, but just the disclosure that this is going out on the internet. And speaking of internet, I'm now going to show you the screen internet. Okay, next up is announcements. Do we have anyone from MICFA Challenge?
Hi.
There you go.
So we are having a youth hack night on the 12th, from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. It's going to be here in the same space. We're looking for adults with tech skills. We want to help youth like myself with their ideas and things like that throughout the city. So if anyone's interested, you guys can talk to us, but there's also a link on the website.
Cool. Missing Maps Chicago Mapathon.
So this happens to be what is called Geography Week or Geo Week. And so at the Red Cross on Saturday, we are hosting a Missing Maps Mapathon with a project in Kenya. And you get asked to work on. So we use OpenStreetMap, and if you want to learn how to use that tool and contribute to the world's map and help this project, come visit us. The link to sign up is right there. The Eventbrite invite, you can sign up and join us. 9:30 to 2, we'll meet you and show you how to make maps.
Cool. Crypto party. Nope, it's in the notes. Okay. So the Code for America Fellowship year is turning over. Code for America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that helps cities develop 21st century technologies. One of the things that Code for America does is send a team of fellows to a city to work on a specific problem. Last year, we lent the awesome talents of Alex Sobel. He was originally a member of ChiHackNight, joined Code for America as a fellow last year, and his last day as a fellow is today. So if you are on Twitter, if you could do me a huge favor, if you could go to Alex's page, Alex Sobel, and just say, congrats on your fellowship year. That would be awesome. Okay, end of announcement. We want Alex to come back. Sure. Okay. GIS Day. And thank you. And Josh actually brought the donuts. All right. Next up is job. Or before I go on, does anybody have any other announcements? Yes.
Quick one, if anyone here has worked a lot with Twilio technology, please see me after this is done. Cool. Great. Oh, first.
No, I got it. If anyone is a high schooler or a parent who is about to enter high school and who has access to the current CPS come talk to me, or if you know someone who is, just come talk to me. My company is thinking about maybe trying to expedite the application process. It gives you what the process is currently that you have to be someone who is either a student or a parent student who's going through the process in order to get into this system.
Cool. Yes.
This is not, for me, this is on behalf of, coincidentally, on Census. Census.gov, they're looking for an intern, so if you know you're promising data science students, they have an internship to work on a product that was launched here last year called City SDK. The student will be doing some Python, some R, some T3, and working to make City SDK better.
Cool. Other announcements? Yes.
Hey guys, again, sorry about that. So we have a job opening on the south side at the Chadwick Enrichment Center. We are looking for a digital media specialist. That could be anything from Photoshop to Microsoft Word, but if you have that expertise, please come talk to me about those.
Awesome. Next. All right. Next up, job postings. Cook County Bureau of Technology.
Cook County, we have 23,000 employees and we're looking for 23,001. So we're hiring a chief technology officer. So if you're into data centers, infrastructure, the hardware side, check that out. And we have a bunch of other jobs that I'm going to get myself into having to explain in ChiHackNight regulations. Somebody called me out on it. But we're hiring for other jobs as well that you can find on cookcountyil.gov.
Cool. Cardinal Path. Okay. Are there any other job posts? Oh.
Yep, sort of a job posting. If any of you are familiar with the Data and Society Fellowships, they are open for application now. They close December 1st. They do require that you go be in or near New York City for the duration, but the stipends are flexible. They look really interesting. You might think that was a URL off the top of my head, but I didn't write a computer. But if you Google Data and Society Fellowship application, it will come up.
Cool.
Chris?
Yeah.
You started learning or a startup, looking for full stack.
Awesome. Any other job postings? Great. So if you want to look back on the announcements or job posting or want to help us take notes about today's meeting, if you go to the ChiHackNight site and click on agenda, it'll bring you to this doc. And with that, we'd like to welcome Nina Sandlin.
Hi there. So data can be really good for telling stories, and stories that I'm interested in, some of them have to do with people who don't have health insurance. So why is that? What's the deal with them? Are they just people who can't seem to find jobs? Well, according to the American Community Survey, click.
What's the American Community Survey?
Which is the richest and most timely source of demographic and economic data from the census. No, it's not the case that they can't find jobs. Most of them are working. So this is one small story. And Rod and Joe are going to share some of their bag of census tricks and tips to help you tell the census data stories that you are interested in yourselves.
Thank you.
Sorry. All right, guys. I don't use Apple products. I want to get to this PowerPoint, which I did click on. I do the, see?
Oh, that's why.
Block group one.
We're doing it live.
To a show, slideshow.
There we go.
Is that my slideshow? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I use a lot of census data, and I did feel the need to show you some static pictures of census geography because the kinds of data from the Census Bureau are different depending on the geographic unit that you're talking about, okay? And so it matters a lot. And this is Logan Square. The monument is about here. The L stop is, well, right there. And the shading is around a city block, as defined by the Census Bureau, for which there are data only from the decennial census, right? Which captures a small but important amount of data on population size for primarily political redistricting and reapportionment of congressional districts. But there is data for every block in the city of Chicago on race, ethnicity, and a few other topics. What's interesting about the geography of a block in Chicago is that they used to be bounded primarily by streets in the way most of us would think of a block. But in 2010, the new grid began to use alleys as boundaries along with streets. So the number of blocks in Chicago for which there is data massively blew up. There's a lot of fine, granular information on certain measures. And in this block, I never noticed this before, but it seems to be the case. This block, which has Kedzie and then an alley as its boundaries, west and east, has a southern boundary that seems to cut right through a block. I never noticed that, and I didn't have time to look into it further than that. But anyway, that's a block for which we have certain kinds of data. We don't have social and economic information for blocks. We don't know poverty rates. We don't know the kinds of occupations that people have at the block level. We don't know a number of other things like that, education levels. That we don't know. However, when you, let's see. So if you take that block, it nests inside of something called a block group, for which there is social and economic data. And very few people use block groups. There's a more limited number of variables available for it, but there are some good ones. There's median household income. There is some education data. It's not iterated by race and ethnicity and gender, the way some other tabulations are at larger geographies. But there's some cool stuff in here. The CPS, of which my kids are grads, used to use tracts as one of the ways of getting into high school, the characteristic of your census tract. I don't know if they do that anymore, do they? Well, a problem with that, one of the issues with that is that you can look at a tract, you'll see a second here, where these smaller block groups will show you there's incredible diversity within the tract, including very wealthy people next to very poor people. You only get to that with this kind of geography. So that's a block group. A block group, then, fits into a census tract. Have you heard of census tracts before? Census tracts are the building blocks for most of our geographically fine, granular portraits of neighborhoods, especially in a city like Chicago, which basically invented neighborhood data. Robert Park and Ernest Burgess at the University of Chicago in the 1920s created and defined the Chicago community areas. You all familiar with community areas? Community areas in the city of Chicago, there are 77. We chopped Chicago into 77 areas. Logan Square, for example, is one. They're built from blocks and tracts, and they were largely defined in the 1920s. It's the legacy of the Chicago Urban School of Sociology. So this is the, or School of Urban Sociology. So this is the tract, right? And I don't know if you can see the numbers here, but this is important. I'm just going to run by it. The largest geography here has got, I think, an 11-digit code. 17 is the state of Illinois. 031 is Cook County. And it's followed by 6 digits. Those 6 digits differentiate every tract in the city. They used to be labeled in a natural kind of nomenclature. They all made sense. In the last census, they redrew the boundaries of a lot of tracts in Chicago. And they came up with a whole bunch that start with the number 8. And they don't conform. It makes it a little harder to aggregate these tracts into community areas, but I'll show you in a second something about that. So I point out this code, right, of which distinguishes this tract from any other place in the United States. Every tract in the country has a unique identifier, right, which is a real feat when you think of a country of 310 million people. So that tract, which has those 6-digit tract ending, it has a block group, which is the exact same code, except it's got a 3 at the end of it, because it's block group number 3 in that tract, okay? There's a block group number 1, number 2, number 3. And then there's a block inside of that block group, which has that same exact code, identifies the state, 17, identifies Cook County, 031, identifies a 6-digit code for the tract it's in, identifies that it's in the 3rd block group of that tract, and then has a unique 005 identifier because it's block number 5 inside of that block group inside of that tract. Okay, everything nests beautifully in census geography, or at least in a lot of it. Thank you. I only have a couple minutes, so I don't want to spend too much more time. All of these go into, so here's a community area. This is Logan Square. We just went through these geographies. Tracts make up Logan Square. There have been problems between the Census Bureau and the city of Chicago in communicating about the correct boundaries of the census tract grid. So that for the first time since the 1920s, the city either signed off on or didn't know about Census Bureau adding a piece of land to Logan Square that had never been there before. It was always part of West Town. It broke the unbroken chain of data comparability for 90 years by that fact. And there were a couple other glitches like that, the 2010 census grid. But anyway, here's Logan Square, and you get it by adding up all those tracts. So the Census Bureau doesn't publish data on Logan Square. You can't get that anywhere. You've got to aggregate data from these tracts. So if this tract has 10 people in poverty, and this one over here has 15, this one over here has 35, you've got to sum those tracts up. That's how we get community area data. I'm shifting to a different type of census geography because it shifts to another type of data. Everything I've talked about so far, blocks, tracts, block groups, are summary level data. It's summarized tabulations that are available from the Census Bureau. So for any geography, it tells me there's 10 people in poverty, there's 35 people in poverty, whatever. It has added them up, right? It told me the sheer numbers. For things that I'm drawing here now called public use microdata areas, the raw census records are available. Stripped of identifiers. So that in an area like this, there are about 100,000 people, and there are about 5,000 records of the residents who live in there. It's a 5% sample. You guys know data, these raw individual records let you do cross-tabulations, frequencies, measures of central tendency, stuff like that with all those people, right? You're actually looking at the people's records. You only get that for bigger geographies like this, right? Public use microdata areas in Chicago are comprised of community areas. In this case, Logan Square, Hermosa, and what's north of Logan Square? Couldn't remember today. Avondale, thank you, is a PUMA, public use microdata area. We're talking today about community areas and summary level data, but if you want to use the PUMA data, which we won't get into, I did want to turn you on to something, which is at the Minnesota Data Center, you can tabulate that microdata on populations by PUMAs, by states, etc., online. It's a reasonably decent tool to get you through the night, as opposed to downloading it, recoding it, messing with the variables and labeling and formatting, we're not talking about today, and in SPSS or state or whatever you use. You get some things done online here at iPumps USA. We won't talk any more about that. And what do I have, a couple of minutes? Just a couple of minutes? Well, thank you. All right. Although this is just getting really into geographic specificity, but another example of the city something happened with the Census Bureau liaison, okay? Liaison, which is that There's a couple tracks in the city. That's one of them I'm highlighting there. This is Chicago Census. I shouldn't be spending time on this. And there's one on the southwest side. This is Mount Greenwood area. You know there's that cemetery in Chicago that's not part of Chicago? Anybody familiar with that? It's a part of Chicago that's discontiguous. This is not the city boundary here. It's a cemetery. Anybody know the name of it? Is it Greenwood Cemetery?
It is Greenwood.
Thank you.
So our team found that hole. We ended up asking people, and it always was, this hole has always been, that hole has always been there. And we never knew why.
Well, it's not part of the, it's not incorporated Chicago. That's what
we did some research behind it. The city wouldn't own cemeteries at the turn of the century because cemeteries were often, they would resell plots to 3 people, right? Because it takes a long time to realize the burial. So the city never wanted anything to do with it. At some time, the city started taking over these cemetery areas. But this one was privately owned by some sort of consortium up until the 90s. And then that broke apart, but the city had never owned it. And so as soon as we found this out, our open data program manager who was doing research updated the Wikipedia page for the cemetery to know all these different things. Because it took us forever to figure out why the hell there's a hole. Another one in the city.
So is that unincorporated Cook County?
What's that?
Is that unincorporated Cook County?
That is unincorporated Cook County. Between Sacramento, California, between 79 and 90%.
You know, I'm quite happy with the cemetery not being part of incorporated Chicago, because it's been that way for decades, okay? I have a different problem, which is that between that unincorporated part of Chicago, there is incorporated Chicago, that my finger's on right here, which was allocated to a tract that extends outside the city. That's the problem. Only in 2010 did they do that. Well, it's a little more complicated than now, but so anyway, if I take all the tracts that are wholly in Chicago, add them up for population, I'm 313 people short compared to the actual count of Chicagoans because of the fact that I don't have the Chicagoans in this portion, and I don't have the Chicagoans in that other portion. Does anybody care about this? I don't need to do it. It's very important when you want your numbers to add up, right? You want your subcategories to add up to your total. Well, they won't if you send it. No, I'm sorry. Please. Okay. Just a few more things. Thanks for your patience. I guess that's it. I have to go now to just a couple minutes on American Fact Finder. And I'm just going to ask, I won't walk through this. This is the interface of the Census Bureau to access its data. There's 2 ways to access Census Bureau data. This is the most user-friendly interface. We could spend a lot of time walking through it, which I won't really do, right? Other than to tell you that when you look at the geographies, expired, hi. Well, we'll just go right back to that real quick. Show me all. The only thing I would point out about the geographies is that sometimes people don't realize there's another tab here of all geographic types. And if you go there, you will see some geographies that you may be interested in, like state legislative districts and some voting districts and things that people miss with the basic interface. I won't go into that too much. The other thing you should know about to access data is the FTP site of the Census Bureau, which looks like this. You need to know more about what you're looking for then. But you will get data that's less encumbered by certain types of variables that are in place when you go to American Fact Finder. These margins of error estimates are in there in a different way. Sorry, it's just an easier thing. Please.
All the data that you're searching on in American Fact Finder is the same data that can be publicly downloaded.
Yeah.
There's not any secret sauce in it.
No, no.
There's stuff that you can't download in bulk. There's a lot.
Oh, oh, the FTP
But
doesn't.
it's the same data.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to take too much more of Joe's time. Just a couple other things real quick. I want to go to an Excel file. Let's say I went through the trouble of downloading a file of census tracts in Chicago that I'm going to aggregate to Chicago community areas. Okay. And I will get a file that looks like this. Okay. And it's got these identifiers. Remember the identifiers we were looking at before of tracts? Every tract's got its nice little identifier for the whole country. Perfect. And here's a file on age by sex, okay? And here's what's a little bit annoying when you work with this data is Here's a total population number. Great, I like that, right? Every variable is followed by a margin of error measure. Fine, right? The trouble is this table has like 200 columns and it's got another 200 margin of error data items. So I just want to share with you one Excel trick, which I was so happy to find. Do all of you use Excel? Like all the time? Like all the time? You don't? Well, then I won't spend too much time, but if you want to get rid of a whole lot of data in Excel that you don't care about, I just found this trick where, well, I would go into this row, right? And I'm going to go to, home, I'm going to go to conditional formatting. I'm going to highlight all those labels that I don't want by typing in margin. They all contain the word margin of error, right? Well, the beauty of this is that it made them all red, right? Normally when we sort data, we sort top to bottom, right? We sort rows. That's usually how we sort data, right? We can also sort columns, right? You can sort columns in Excel by color. You follow me? By text. And you take all those red formatted labels and you ship them to the ass end of the file. You know what I mean? That's your tip. And I think, Joe, I'll let you come on up. There's more we could do, but thank you. Thank you very much. All right. You know, there's one last thing, Joe. This won't take more than a second. So you got all those census tracts. How do you know which census tracts go into which community area? In the old days, you knew. In the old days, all of the Logan Square census tracts began with 22. And so it was easy. In that 2010, they renumbered a lot of them. So you don't know. You have to use a lookup table. And if you want, on my website, I've put these lookup tables that assign the tracts to the correct, oh, I can't spell now. You can get the file, I'm not gonna do it. It'll be a list of tracts with the code for the correct community area, right? And you would just relate the tables together and then you could aggregate your tracts up to a given community area. Does that make sense? I'm sure that's good data people.
How granular is the data outside of metropolitan areas?
Oh, it's the same, exact same. Yeah, because these units of geography, blocks and tracts and block groups, they aim for a similar sized population. So on one you might have a land square mile large tract, but it'll have roughly the same population as a tract in New York.
In 2010. And then in 2020, you get to things like. So here's a pop quiz. Where do you think the densest tract in America is? Anybody know? Does anybody see me say this fun fact of another talk?
A prison somewhere?
No. It's actually right here in Chicago in Edgewater. So if you're on Sheridan Road, like between Berwyn and Catalpa or so, there's like 3 skyscrapers or 3 really tall apartment buildings, and together I think they're the total population isn't that high, but it's very small. And so that is the single densest tract in the States. The rest are all in New York, mostly in Manhattan, I think a couple in other boroughs. But so there's a fun fact for you. So hi, my name is Joe Jermoska, and I was the project lead, am the project lead for a thing called Census Reporter. How many people here have used Census Reporter before? Okay, that's pretty good. How many people here consider yourselves total noobs about the American Community Survey until Rob started down the road? Okay, so there's so much we could talk about, and I have a lot of slides, but we don't have to do them all. So I kind of wanted to get in front of everybody and figure out the best way to say what's useful. So I put the link to this in the Google Doc for tonight. And so, oh wow, the colors are pretty wrong. That's closer. That's close to.
It might be me.
That's fine. No, they're just different. The monitors are different. These are very blue. So Census Reporter is a project funded by the Knight Foundation to make census data easier for journalists. It was a News Challenge winner in 2012. And in 2013 and 14, we built out the tool, and now it's in sort of a maintenance mode. We kind of spent all the original funding. I am currently working on some ways to get some more money and keep things moving forward. But it is, in its spirit, meant to work at multiple levels. First, to make it very easy for someone who just wants to go to the web and get some data and understand it, but also to build that on top of a stack of tools that help people like you in this room do more with census data at any level you want to get to. So if you're really into this kind of thing, you can export our SQL data dumps and load all the American Community Survey data into a Postgres database and slice and dice it yourself, which is not typically what data analysts do because SQL is not, they just use SPSS or whatever, or R. But I find it super awesome to be able to like quickly whip out some SQL commands and get through this stuff. So if you ever want to talk about that, I can tell you more. Anyway, what I wanted to do today, what I prepared my slides for, was to actually answer the question, what's in the ACS? Because that was the prompt I got for this. And then I read the thing, and they said I was also going to do a tour of Census Reporter. But I think I'm going to skip that, because we really tried to make it easy. So hopefully you don't need me to show you how to use it. And also, I'm going to stick around for a little bit tonight afterwards. So if you want to talk about any of the stuff that we either blast past, or if you want to look at specific things about Census Reporter, or talk about the nerdier side of what I was just kind of alluding to, we can do that after the slides. So for the presentation, I'm going to try and really talk about what's in there, and kind of draw a boundary around it for you. So some of this may be familiar to some of you guys, but some of you, it will hopefully be new. So the Census Bureau as a whole does a lot of stuff. Of course, it was created to count the population, basically for voting district. But along the way, they've gotten to counting all these other things. The Census Bureau counts demographics, housing situations. They're the premier map maker of the United States, economic data, as well as agricultural and government data, which we sometimes don't realize is part of what they do. That's led to this gigantic list of products, which we're not going to talk about. It's just here to kind of blow your mind. So there's all this stuff that you can get from the census, so much. But there's really three big ones. The decennial census, of course, the original thing that was designed to count Americans and figure out how we vote, how we allocate our representatives. The American Community Survey, which Rob was talking a little bit, which is the focus of tonight's talk, and the current population survey, which is another one of the big data sources. So I'm not going to get into all of the details of those, but those are the three that if you really want to start sort of unpeeling the onion, you'll want to get into. With all those choices, it's important to have some idea of what the difference is. And so here I'll just kind of outline what data you need. Those different big surveys ask different questions. They overlap, which is a little confusing, but some things are only in one or the other. Methodology, so the decennial census is the only one that's an exact count. They try very hard to count every individual citizen, actually not even citizen, resident of the United States. They have some methods for adjusting for possible error and filling in the gaps, but everything else is a survey, which means that there's estimates and corresponding margins of errors, which Rob was alluding to, and so you may need to take that into account, especially for things like doing the allocation that he was talking about. The margin of error can complicate things. Timeliness, of course, is important. The decennial census only comes out every 10 years, so in 2018, it's going to be maybe not quite that useful. Geography, what is available. So like the CPS really only goes down to states and a few major cities, so you can't really get very fine-grained, but it has very long data over time, historical comparability. So the current population survey has decades of data that you can compare for certain statistics at the national and at the state level, whereas the American Community Survey was just created in the early 2000s, and for small geographies really is still barely usable for comparison over time. So Census Reporter is targeted at the American Community Survey because it hits a sweet spot. It's a really nice balance. You can get a lot more local than the current population survey, as I sort of alluded to. You can get all the way down to block groups. So Rob gave you a little primer on geography. I have some slides we can get into a little bit. We'll talk about it more later. But you can get pretty small. Of course, margins of errors for small sample sizes can be high, but still you have the opportunity to do that. And it also comes out much more frequently than the decennial census. So every year, a new American Community Survey data set is released. And each year, a new set is available for any geography that is about 65,000 people or more. So in this year, we got the 2014 data in September for geographies that are greater than 65,000. And in December, we'll get the next set, which is the data all the way down to the block group, regardless of population. So they don't go down to the block, but they go down to the block group. And we'll get that coming soon. In past years, there was also an interim release for data that is aggregated over 3 years of collection that got places that were 20,000 population or more, but that was canceled this year because of the eternal fight over whether or not the census should even be funded, which is a terrible thing that people fight over, but sometimes they think that they shouldn't be asking you all those questions. By the way, I am totally game for you guys to interrupt me with questions, or if I'm not talking loud enough or mutter or whatever, so we can do it. But so really what's in there, this is the subjects. I'm not going to read them over. This is the, I think I have all of the basic subjects of the American Community Survey. So we at Census Reporter break it down into 5 big groups: demographics, economics, families, housing, and social. Families is kind of a subset of demographics that has to do with relationships of people, parents, and also just people who live together. We just thought that sort of put this group of things together nicely instead of having one really giant demographics section. And then so there's a lot of things. One of the interesting things, a lot of the social characteristics are really only, that's not true, are mostly available in the ACS. Because the decennial census is meant to be just about how we vote, so they ask a very limited number of questions, basically age, sex, race, and housing situations, and really nothing else. So the American Community Survey is where all the other stuff about education, income, kind of work people do, et cetera, are in there. There's also, as of 2013, they added questions about some internet stuff. Some of these little social bits are in the CPS at a big macro level. They do sort of intermittent special subjects that are available for. So I don't actually know that much about that, so I won't say anymore. Just briefly about geographies. This is like the classic weird, I don't know what you call this, coffin-shaped diagram of census geographies. But what Rob was talking about is this big spine. And this is the key thing to know. All of these are properly contained by each other. So he started at the block. There's about 8 million blocks in the US, in case you cared. Block group, there's about 210,000 of those. 74,000 tracts, 3,000 counties, 52 states. What? But you have to keep your eye, because Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico show up as essentially as states. You also get confused because Washington, D.C. also shows up as a county and a city. So you just have to sort of keep on your toes about all this stuff. There are 9 divisions. It's like Midwest, South Central. I can't remember what they all are. 4 regions, basically the corners of the country, and then of course the nation. You can also get census data for the island areas, Virgin Islands, Guam, Marianas, et cetera, but that's not in the American Community Survey at all. But Puerto Rico is, which can also kind of, like I said, a 52nd state and can sort of smell you up. But all of these, by definition, are contained. So every block is within a single block group, et cetera. Rob sort of alluded to a potential issue, which is places or cities do not necessarily align to tract boundaries. And so when you deal with this stuff, you can sort of run into hitches, or you have to just account for imprecision. And of course, in a journalistic case, which is the way that we're targeting this stuff, a lot of times that imprecision is fine because readers don't want the last number, and it may be better to just sort of give a sentence that correctly but generally addresses the trend or the nature of the issue, as opposed to trying to get down to an exact number. But another way that you can sort of get snarled up when you're dealing with census data is when you want to talk about my town, my place, because they have a bunch of different ways of referring to that. So typically what we would think of when we think of a place or a city or town is what the Census Bureau calls a place. That's one of the summary levels. So each of these things is called a summary level. They have a code. They have sort of distinct sets of GIS data that have their boundaries. So the place summary level happens to be 160, and that's any place that is a municipal incorporated municipality, but also a decent sized number of things called census designated places, which just reflect places that people would ask them for data for, like things that have sort of a cohesive identity. Sometimes townships that are not incorporated count as census designated places, and there's other things like that. You get the gist of it when they matter to you, or you make the list and you say, oh, that's weird, and then you ask those questions. But there's another thing called county subdivision, which is actually what townships are in Illinois and in the sort of old Northwest Territory states that were organized that way. I have never had a particular reason to worry about county subdivisions here, but actually there's like 8 states where they're actually really important, and sometimes more important than places in terms of doing this count. So Michigan is the one closest to us. A lot of New England states, New Jersey also. I can't remember them all, but actually Census Bureau has a place where they're all listed out. So if you're doing a national level thing, you may need to sort of consider the possibility that you are not comparing all of the things that you want to compare. Unless you understand this, I won't try and explain all of it now, but just be on guard. Most of us, especially here, are doing stuff at a smaller level, like maybe county area, the metro area, so it's not such a big deal. But speaking of metro areas, we also have this thing called core-based statistical areas, which is census jargon for basically metropolitan area or micropolitan statistical area. And the differences between those have to do with the size of the core and a whole bunch of math that for most of us doesn't really matter, but basically they are built up by counties. So a metro area in Census Bureau is a county that has a core of a certain size population, and then all the counties around it that essentially sort of form a gravity system where the core is where most of the people work or their attention is drawn. And they sort of have these systems for almost like, you guys know what Voronoi diagrams are? You can probably sort of do that with these. But so not all of America is in a metropolitan area, or a CBSA, I should say. So you also have to sort of consider that depending on how things are going. But there are a lot of them. In fact, there are 942. There's also a thing called combined statistical areas, which get to like the megalopolis thing. So if you want, you can sort of go to the census and get the number that is, I think, the whole New York, Washington, D.C. corridor. That might be 2, but it might just be 1 CSA and that kind of stuff. And it's the Wikipedia stuff on this is fun. You can just, if you're a nerd like I am, which I know a lot of you are, you can spend a lot of time just kind of looking at those lists and just like trying to get a sense of how it all lays out. And then the last sort of weird thing is an urban area is a lot like CBSA, except instead of being defined by the counties that are in this system, they're defined by the places where the population density is thick enough to count as urban. So essentially an urban area is like CBSA, but it has holes in it. And if there's sort of rural areas in the middle. And I have never bothered to do much more than learn why it exists. That's all I can tell you about it. So that's about the geography. Now we'll try and talk about the stuff that is in there in terms of the data, the questions. So the big thing when I think about the American Community Survey is the detailed tables. But in preparing this tonight, I realized that there's a whole lot more that I sort of have always known was out there, but I thought it was worth laying out and sort of having for all of us. But the detailed tables are the specific tabulations that the Census Bureau makes in order to provide useful data while still being able to essentially obscure the individual responses, right? They can't give all the raw data, or you'd be able to figure out whether your neighbor was this, that, or the other, and possibly, violate people's privacy. So the tabulations allow them to give you summary statistics that are useful and interesting, but sometimes don't have the right factors tabulated, and then we can get into the PUM stuff that Rob alluded to. Anyway, there's about 1,400 of these tables in 640 tabulations. This was like a thing I thought was kind of an innovation with Census Reporter and trying to make sense of this, was to collapse the things that are basically the same columns but have subtle differences. And this is a little inside baseball. So if I lose you here, don't worry too much about it. We can talk more about it later, or you can just delve into it. But basically, tabulations, you can see, if you can read this, that there are 2 tables that have almost the same number, B02003 and C02003. So we call, at Census Reporter, 02003 a single tabulation, which basically is detailed race. And the tabulation is basically which questions on the survey went in to come up with the data. B tables are full tables. I don't know why they're B, but they're B. They have more columns. They're more finely grained. C tables, whether or not it stands for anything, I think of C as collapsed. It's basically the same questions, but with less columns. And a lot of times that's a lot easier. I think we all who have started down this road often say, oh, well, the B tables are the big tables. That's what I want. But sometimes it's nice to not have to mess with all that stuff. Like Rob was showing the 200-some columns of sex by age. A lot of people just want, give me the kids and the seniors and in between, 3 columns. And that's the sex by age. The table that he was looking at has like 5-year brackets and even smaller in like young people. Like, you can get just 20 and 21-year-olds or something like that. But for most cases, that's a hassle. And if you have that whole spreadsheet, you've got to roll that back up. So don't neglect the C tables. It can make your life a lot easier. In addition, when we have this idea of tabulations, basically the same columns, there's a bunch that are available in what we call racial iterations, which means you get all the same columns, but just for white people, white alone. And we could talk a lot about race. I'm not even going to start down the race. Race, of course, in America is a ridiculously complicated issue. and the census reflects and maybe even aggravates that complexity. It's important to handle with care. I can talk to you about handling with care, but I'm not going to do that any more than that. Disclaimer now. But for a decent number of tables, you can go in and say, get me these counts just for people who said they are white alone, black alone, Asian alone, Hispanic alone, and things like that. Another little thing just to clue you into if you never picked up on it, the table codes actually have a little bit of structure. So the first 2 digits after the letter are a subject area. We actually have a table, this link here, this is a link if you go to the slides on the web, links to the census reporter page where we lay out exactly those codes. It's not like we just copied something the census had, but so you can find out which big bucket of tables is roughly of interest to you. There's a handful of technical tables if you really want to get into the methodology and how many people they asked for things and what they did to fill in the gaps and stuff like that, but we mostly skip past that. You guys with me so far? Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some other kinds of tables that I think are really cool, but that are not really in Census Reporter because we can't download them in bulk. This is what I was referring to, Carl, when you asked that question. So there's a handful of things that you can get either from pages on the Census Bureau site or through the fact finder, but you can't go and just say, give it all to me, which is the kind of thing we want to do for our tool. Like, give it all to me, we'll suck it all in. But these are really useful if you don't want to be so expert. If by now you're like, God, this is ridiculous, can this be a little easier? This is where you should like focus in now. I probably should have put this first instead of the detail tables. So the data profiles are super convenient collections of data in these 4 categories: social, economic, housing, and demographics. And you get those for any place that the American Community Survey exists for, I think. Probably all of them, maybe not block groups. And they just sort of have an expert assessment that says, okay, for social, we'll talk about who's on, or for economic, we'll talk about who's on public assistance and who's living at the poverty level and those kinds of things, and just the top level things. And if you look at Census Reporter, we have pages for places, and we, in some part, inspired by those choices about what were the most important figures, put those together on the pages that we show you for a single place that you're curious about. So if you just want the top line numbers, this is a great place to go. Another kind of interesting product that I haven't done a lot with, but which might be suitable for you or maybe someone you know, they have these narrative profiles, which are actually text. I'm not quite sure how they're produced, probably algorithmically, but they're text with some bar charts. And they say there's like 15 topic areas, but if you just kind of want to soak it in about someplace and not look at just tables and charts, check those out. And these are links to places on the Census website where you can get this stuff. So again, the URL for this is in the notes, or it's also bit.ly what's in ACS with dashes. There's another thing called subject tables, which are kind of like the data profiles, but they go deeper. They're more subject oriented. They still sort of organize top level numbers, possibly from more than one table. So here's just some examples, just to give you a flavor for it. Characteristics of teenagers 15 to 19 years old is SO9002. Disability characteristics, food stamps and SNAP. Movers between regions. So you can find these, there's 71 of these. They're pretty easy to browse on the Census website. So if you're just like, I need a certain kind of number, this might be an easy place to start before you go digging deep into which of these 640 tabulations, 1,400 detail tables has what I want. If you just want numbers, this is maybe a good place to start. If you're doing comparative stuff, because you can't get it in bulk, it may not work as well, but could be a road in. There's a little bit more, so lists. These are also fun ones. I really want to put some lists on Census Reporter. I told you, like, I go, dork out over the list of like metro areas by population. Just like, oh, that's interesting. Look how many. There's only 10 that are more than so many population, and whatever. I think lists can be really interesting. Just kind of absorb a bunch of things at once. They have these things called ranking tables, which are just states for different measures. So they have the United States number and then 50 states plus DC, maybe Puerto Rico. Things like percent of houses that are heated with gas or any of the other major heatings, each is a different one. Ratio of unmarried men to unmarried women, or the opposite. Percent of grandparents responsible for grandchildren. So there's a lot of juicy stuff in there. There's 89 of those, and again, this links to a place where you can go get at those. So if you want to sort of compare the thing, but again, these are only states. But there's this other thing that's even more obscure, and as far as I can tell, you can only get to these in Fact Finder. They're called the geographic comparison tables. There's a little section in Fact Finder. Who here has never used American Fact Finder, by the way? Okay. it has its detractors, but it has a whole bunch of stuff in it, and it is the best way to get some stuff. It's the only way to get some stuff. There's a section where you can pick the kind of data product, and you can sort of drill in and pretty quickly say, just give me the GCTs, and then look those over. But so I did a little analysis on those to prepare for this. Like I said, they're a lot like those ranking tables, but they're not limited to just states. So you can get all the states for more different things. You can get all the counties in a specific state for all the states, all the places, cities, or congressional districts, metro areas, et cetera. So you can get different kinds of lists to rank places against each other. And there's almost 100 different subjects that are in this form. Percent of workers who took public transit to work, percent of workers in service occupations or manufacturing for that matter. Median monthly housing costs for people who have a mortgage. I think there's probably similar things for how much people are paying in rent. So if you want to know, which metro area in America has, when you see those kinds of statistics, this is an easy way to get at that without having to do a ton of analysis. It's there for you already. I made a little gist on GitHub, just basically like copied the menu or the list of them from Fact Finder and put it all. So if you want to look at them all in one place, this is my little minor public service for you. Rob sort of hinted at this public use microdata stuff, so I won't say a whole lot about it. I would love to get more practice working on it, but I haven't had the opportunity. I will point out a friend of mine who works in the New York Times tells people about PUMs by telling the story he had, which is he was curious about whether or not you could measure the decline of the sort of single proprietor Italian barbershop in New Jersey that he grew up taking for granted. He felt like he didn't see them anymore, and he was able to actually work out a way with PUMs, because you can talk about people's ancestry, what kind of work they do, and he was able to, at a state level, come up with a pretty decent assessment of the actual state of Italian people who are barbers. And the link over here is to a piece. So we commissioned a story from him for the Source website. Who knows what Source is? Open News Source? Okay. I would encourage those of you who are at all interested in data, especially with the journalistic slant, but you can learn a lot of tricks anyway. The Knight Mozilla Open News Project runs this website that is basically sort of the journal of the state of the art in data journalism stuff. There's lots of great things there. And Census Reporter commissioned a half dozen stories from different people to explain stuff that really has nothing to do with Census Reporter. It's just about the census, but we wanted them to tell their story to people. So you can go check those out. And Rob's is how to use PUMs and how to use that IPM site that Rob Carl showed a minute ago. So if you want to get at that, you can read his thing and maybe feel a little more comfortable stepping into that. Okay, we're almost at the end, I promise. Probably gone longer than I was supposed to, but what's not in there, just a couple things. Neighborhoods within cities, that was pretty much what Rob was getting at the end of his talk, so you have to go out of your way if you want to get at that level. Sometimes Pumas can suffice, like he said. Pumas are areas of about 100,000 people. Chicago's made up of 19 of them. They are designed in sort of collaboration with the people who live on the ground. So in Chicago, you can name the specific community areas that are in any Puma, and they are contained within the Pumas. They're all mostly, Austin is the only one that's big enough to be its own Puma. Otherwise, you can get the list. That doesn't really get to the neighborhood level, though, right? I mean, 100,000 people is not exactly a neighborhood, but it is a quick way to get at some sub-city level statistics. And you can actually get this data from some of the other tabulations we talked about without having to deal with the PUMS data. But this is also the smallest geography for which you can get that PUMS data because of the need to protect people's privacy. There's nothing about religion. It's probably obvious if you think about it for a second. And in fact, for a little while, I think in like the 30s or 40s, they did actually ask questions about religion on the census, but they quickly realized that was out of bounds. Another thing that people often want to know about, but it's not really in the census, is sexual orientation. They certainly don't ask people, what is your thing, but they do ask some questions that you can use to infer relationships about same-sex households. It's very much in motion, of course, marriage equality becoming the rule of the land, law of the land. The Census Bureau is trying to figure out how to deal with all this stuff. So the link here is to a page that I wrote, it's about a year old now, trying my best on Census Reporter to explain a little bit about where you can get at this data if you want to know some things. And we've done some analysis with that casually that reflects common sense about, for example, in Chicago, where different concentrations of the same-sex population are. So, I wouldn't go too far with it, but you can find out some things if you want to. And then I just wanted to put down a few links. So again, I'm not going to show you Census Reporter up on the stage, but I'll sit around here somewhere and we can talk about it until I turn blue. Trust me, I can not be stopped if you're not careful. The goal is to make census data easier for journalists. Thank you, Knight Foundation, IRE. At the end here, I have links to some other great tools. IPMs we talked about. Census.ire.org is an earlier thing I did. If you want to deal with decennial census data in bulk, it's good for that. So just know I can make your life easy with that. Fact Finder, some other ones. Communities, you're not alone here. So the one I really want to push, who here uses the Open Data Stack Exchange? Yeah, it really doesn't get a lot of love. And it's like, it's sort of because it sometimes doesn't earn it, but it could be really good. And it would be better if we all use it. So I want to encourage you, if you have questions that other people probably have, to ask them on opendata.stackexchange.com. And I try to keep an eye on the census tag myself. I've answered a few things there. I'll try and keep an eye on it. So that's a good place to go to ask questions with the hope that the answer will not just serve you, but maybe leave a record for the future. This is the ACS data community is the one the Census Bureau runs. It's kind of a terrible website, but sometimes it has good questions on it. This last one here is a thing, just a bunch of videos about like every, that way at the beginning I had that list of all the stuff the Census Bureau has. If you go to this website, you can watch like a 45-minute video from experts, including some people who work for the census and also journalists that say, here's how to get to the bottom of the CPS or the SIP program, all these obscure things. So that's a good resource if you're just trying to learn about some things. And finally, some links. So our website, our Twitter handle, more stuff about Census Reporter. I have a small handful of Census Reporter pins and one sticker. Don't all knock each other out. You can only find one sticker. I don't even know what, but if you want to try, go up and get it. Hopefully this has been useful to you. And like I said, I'm happy to stick around for a while and chat with people one-on-one about census stuff because I can't stop talking about it. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two questions before we go into breakouts. Anybody have any questions? Oh, okay. So
Yes. Just as you're replying through it, for those urban areas based on density that have holes in them, how big are the holes? Are those block groups?
I mean, they could be as small as a block, although realistically they probably wouldn't be. I can't remember the math sort of is the density required.
Yeah.
But they, the best thing to do is to look at a map of them. I can show you how to look at a map of them. Actually, that's one of the geographies we have on Census Reporter. So you can call it up as a profile page and see, just to get a real thumb. Yes.
Are you able to find registered voter information?
No. So that stuff is jealously guarded by the political parties who buy it and sell it. And
there are voting tabulation districts, and there's something there. I haven't worked with them for a long time. You can maybe merge the county something for the voting tabulation.
So the tabulation districts are basically what's used to the precincts, like where you're making ballot, right? And so they basically collected that for the whole country. So they can be an interesting level of geography, but they don't actually know who's registered to vote because that's mostly a county by county problem and doesn't boil a lot of it.
But there is, however, a survey which is different than the administrative record. There are administrative records on who's registered, right? County can read it. But then there's a survey called voting registration, and then after every election, part of the current population survey. And it does ask people, did you vote? Are you registered or are you not? The trouble is the data, it's a smaller sample, so it's only good for metro areas at best, and really it states mostly, not for fine granular data. It's a sample.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay. Well, Joe, Rob, and Nina can stick around. They'll be over here. And thank you so much for presenting.